All right, today we are going to be installing our bug screens on a Promaster van. We're going to start with the sliding door first, and then we're going to move to the rear of the van. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to unpack what you get when you order our bug screens. They come inside this little carrying case that some people keep. If you ever want to zip out the bug screens, you can store them inside this case. Inside the hardware package, there is 2 sizes of metal fabric clips. They're labeled large and small. And then there's a few truss screws, and I'll show you where those actually get used when we get to that part of the install. When you open up the case, you're going to see that it comes with a foam tube. This foam tube goes in the bottom of the screen once it's installed. And then you'll have the actual bug screen. So the first thing you're going to want to do is just kind of unfold it. And you'll notice that there's a zipper that goes all the way around the perimeter. So it's a continuous zipper all the way around the edge. So you're going to want to zip out, unzip that entire perimeter zipper, so you're just left with this sort of 10-inch wide perimeter piece with this red alignment aid. So once you find the outer zipper, just unzip everything. And then you're left with just this perimeter piece. The way that it gets installed on the van, just so you know you have it in the right orientation, is you'll see there's this branding patch that says The Wanderful on it with a little bit of our company slogan. That piece goes on the rear side of the van. So when you're holding it up to the van, and that faces the interior of the van. So when you hold it up like this piece here, the label faces into the van and goes like that. When it comes to tools for installing the screens, it's very basic hand tools that make the job a whole lot easier. One of them is step ladder. Step ladder makes it a lot easier for getting up in here, and just, you could stand inside the van and do it, but I find it easier to be sort of out this way looking in when I install it, so a step ladder. The next kind of important thing is spring clamps. These are just from Amazon. They come in multiple sizes. I think these are the large ones, and this is the small one. 3 or 4 of them is plenty. I find it helpful to have either needle nose pliers or a flathead screwdriver. This is for when you're installing the metal fabric clips to hold the screen on. Sometimes you have to move them, and it's easier to get them off if you have a flathead screwdriver to kind of pry them open, or a set of needle nose pliers. Next is a hammer. You can either use a regular hammer, or if you have a rubber mallet, that works fine as well. When you're pushing the metal fabric clips on the flange, sometimes it is quite tight, so if you just get it started with your thumb, you can kind of tap it in place with the hammer. Keep in mind, we're not swinging hard with this. It's just to tap on the clip and get it snugged up into place. So you'll see that when we go for the install. The other tool you're going to need is an X-Acto knife, or utility knife as some people call it. The important thing here is just to have a fresh blade that's nice and sharp. It's going to make the job a whole lot easier and give you a nice clean cut when you're finished. On the Promaster vans, sometimes when you're removing the weather stripping, you'll find that there's a bit of a silicone sort of adhesive. I'm not even sure if it's an adhesive or a sealant, but it's quite gucky and gets on your hands. So I actually like to use some rubber gloves and then have some paper towel or some rags to clean off the edge as I go. The last thing is, it's not a bad idea to have a couple bowls. When you open up your hardware kit, like I said, we give you the truss screws, some large fabric clips, and some small fabric clips. I like to separate the large and small ones in a bowl, so I've got the large in one and the small in the other, just so it's easier to grab. A drill is a handy thing to have. Once we have the screen finished the install, we do have some finishing screws that go in at the bottom just to keep the screen nice and tight. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're just going to open up our little hardware pack. You can see we've got the truss screws. We're going to set those aside. We've got these small fabric clips and the large ones. I'm going to put each of these into a bowl, and then we're going to get started with the install. All right, so now we're going to get started. I've got my gloves on because I don't know how much grease and sealant we're going to find in behind here, but we're going to start with just removing some of the weather stripping off of the front edge of the van. When I install these screens, the sliding door screen, I always start on the front edge in the bottom corner here and work my way around. The first thing I'm going to do is just kind of grab the weather stripping, you know, what am I, about 2 feet up here, and just kind of pull it off. I'll just run the rag over it just to kind of make sure. The reason you use the clamps is sort of 2 things. One is if the whole thing falls off or comes off, it's very hard to get it back on in the right orientation. So you're basically using these clamps to kind of stop the weather stripping from falling off at the top. So I usually like to stick one up at the top here, and then I can remove the weather stripping on this whole side up to that clamp. The weather stripping is actually kind of heavy, so if I didn't have the clamp there, there's a chance that this whole top piece would fall down, and then the weight of the top side and the front edge would pull this side down, and it becomes a much bigger project to get everything set back up. So that's why we use the clamps to kind of work in manageable sections. If you remember from the start of the video, I'm just going to find the front edge. So again, you put it in the orientation so the label is at the back. So I can see the labels here, so that means that's the back edge, and so this is the front edge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that same clamp, and I want to clamp it in place so I've got the material hanging a little bit below the bottom edge here. The reason I want it below the bottom edge is because I want to make sure I've got enough slack, because I basically want to start the install with this at the bottom edge. So I don't have enough hanging down there, so I'm just going to cheat it over a bit. Get more material down there. And so now you can see that I've got enough material on the edge here that it's below the step. If you have this van here, it's a rental van, so it doesn't have the factory floor or a finished floor in it. There's a bit of leeway at the top, you can see with our alignment aid here, if you need to move the screen up or down a little bit. You basically want to line this up as close to the bottom of your finished floor as possible. You have to peel away the weather stripping so you've got this corner exposed. And then when you're looking at the perimeter piece, you'll see we have this red stitch line. This red stitch line, we call that our alignment aid. So what we're going to do there is you take that alignment aid, and that goes right on the center of this sort of pinch weld. And to hold it in place, we use one of the metal fabric clips. Different vans in different places you'll use the small versus the large. I always try the small one first because it has the better hold. If I can make it work, I like using the small. If it doesn't work, then I move to the large. So I'm going to start with a small one here. I get the material. I like to get it a little bit below the step. Not much, just a little bit, maybe like a centimeter or a 1/4 inch. And then I put my first fabric clip right at the very bottom. So this one, push it in place. A small one's going to work, but I just need my hammer to kind of tap it snug. You can see I'm not swinging hard, I'm just kind of tapping it in. And then I move up again. And again, I'm just making sure this red alignment aid is right kind of on the center of the pinch weld. Try a small again. This is a small, I'm going to be able to get it to work. I'll just tap that in place. So now I'm just going to put another one sort of in between these because it looks like it's lining up well. Make sure I'm still liking how I'm looking at the bottom here. I'm starting to rise a little bit, so I might just pull this down a bit. Just grab it and just give myself a little bit of slack. Put another one here. Let's try a small. Yep, small one works. Try another small up here. Now we've got the first kind of tricky area, and that's the top corner. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to install the weather stripping kind of back up into this top fabric clip, clamp it here, and then move this top clamp over so I can expose that whole corner and secure the weather stripping so it doesn't fall in. One thing to note when you're putting the corners back in is if you end up with extra weather stripping where it feels like, you know, the weather strip grew somehow and it's too big to fit back in place, It's likely because you don't have the corners snugged into the radius tight enough. So what you're going to want to do is kind of push it down into the corner, and then you just kind of run it back up. So it feels like I've got it good and snug down in there. And then as long as you get the corner snug, you should be okay. Okay, so now we've got the front edge installed. Everything looks good there. So now we're going to do this first corner. The corners are the trickiest spot. So that's where you really want to take your time. You want the corners to be nice and tight. And I'll show you a few tricks to get them sort of as tight as possible. This is where what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this first clamp just down somewhere near the middle of the weather stripping at the top, because I do need to pull off this section of weather stripping to work. Once I have the weather stripping installed on this side with the fabric clips, I don't usually find it necessary to put a clamp down here, but it's not a bad idea. So if I was going to clamp in here, I would just clamp somewhere like that down here. And now I've kind of isolated this working section. So I'm going to pull the weather stripping off. So you'll notice in the corner there is no alignment aid, because it's really hard to stitch on an alignment aid that follows the radius. So there's kind of a gap on the side, and then the alignment aid starts again across the top. So your kind of goal as you come around the corner is just to make sure that as you start to reach the flat section again, you pick up the new alignment aid coming across the horizontal section across the top. This is a little bit of trial and error. Let's see how we go here. I'm going to put another fabric clip right before the radius, right before we start to make the bend. I can tell just by pinching it that this one's going to be a large on this end. When you do the corner, so now I'm right in the corner. And it feels like it's going to be a large down in here, and then I'll be able to get a small up in here. So what you want to do is you're going to use your fingers. So whichever is kind of your, I don't know if it'd be your non-dominant hand or whichever one, you stick this kind of in behind the flange with the material. So you kind of push it back in here. You'll see that that makes it so you're able to kind of wrap the material around. And then you grab a fabric clip and you want to push it pretty tight. You should feel like there's a decent amount of tension up in here. So I got that clip started. Again, this is the hardest section, so this is you just want to be patient here. Tap it into place. So once you've got the one in, you can kind of see how it starts to come around the corner nicely. So I'm going to come across here a little bit and see, okay, I want to pick up this alignment aid over here, and I'm looking good for that. So I'm just going to put another one in here, make sure to get it nice and tight. If you don't get this area tight enough, when you do zip in the actual screen, the magnetic sort of door isn't going to work properly because there's going to be too much slack in this area here. Okay, tap that into place. I'm going to put another small one there. Don't be afraid to use extra clips in the corner, because this corner, especially the leading corner, because that's where the opening is kind of the most important corner of the whole install. So now I've got the corner in place, I'm going to put a few across the top here, picking up the red alignment aid again. Okay, so now I'm going to work on putting the weather stripping back into the corner. And you'll notice that if you have it too tight, you're not going to be able to get the weather stripping in. So you've got to make sure that you stuck your fingers in far enough and wrapped it around far enough that there's enough room for the weather stripping to get in there. So again, I start on this bottom edge, and you want to make sure in this top corner, just like the bottom, you get all of the slack out. Okay, so now as we put the weather stripping in, again, you want to make sure in the corners that you get it really snugged in there. And you can see as I put the corner in, is it gets really nice and tight in this corner. And when you kind of tap on it, it sounds like a drum. What you want is you want it nice and tight in that corner. Don't worry about all this excess, we trim that off after. So I'm really happy with how this corner is looking. You can see that this seam in the perimeter is nice and parallel with the ground. That's kind of how we like it looking. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move my clamp from the side here. I'm going to move it to the top because I don't want it to fall in this section because I'm happy with this corner. And I'm going to move this clamp down to the side, and I'm going to start working, sort of finish the top, do the back corner, and then work my way down the side. So I'm going to take this, pull it almost all the way across the top, pull it nice and tight, and then pin it down at the far end. So yeah, I've got it pinned along the top edge here. You want to make sure you've got enough fabric so you can come down the sides. And then I'm just going to put another clip here. Again, I like to use smalls whenever possible. Small one fits there nice and easy. So now we've got the second corner. The back corner is a little bit tricky because the sliding door gets in the way a little bit. You kind of have to work around it. So it's hard to get a shot of it, but it's the same concept where you use your fingers, and as you're coming around, you got to tuck material in the back of the flange and tack it in place as you come around. So you want the material to be nice and tight, and you just kind of mock it up a little bit how you want it to be when you're done. And so that's going to be a big clip there. So because I've done it, you can kind of start to feel where you're going to need a big clip versus small clip, but you'll be surprised at some places where you're like, oh, this is definitely a big clip, and you can actually get a small one to work. So yeah, this back edge on this Promaster is actually quite thick, and even the big fabric clips are a little snug. It was kind of tricky to get that one on. So these are made out of spring steel. So if you need to make one of them a little bit bigger, you can just take some needle nose pliers and kind of stick it in and just spread it a little bit, and you'll be able to get it a little bit bigger. You know, it doesn't need much. It just needs a hair bigger so it slides on. So yeah, as I'm working around the corner, my kind of goal is to keep this stitch line as close to parallel with the ground as I can. One thing I like to check as I've kind of rounded the last corner here is just to make sure, does it look like I'm going to have enough fabric when I get to the bottom? And you can see I'm basically perfectly hovered above this edge here. If you found that you had way too much material or way too little material, there's a few areas to check. So if you have way too much material, so you've got a whole bunch of excess, you probably didn't start your leading edge low enough, so you need to move that up, and you kind of work the material all the way around. Or you'd work it back this way. Or your corners are going to be too loose and you haven't got them tight enough. If you don't have enough material here, so you're short, it's basically the opposite. You probably started that too low, and you need to bring material around. So as long as you're right near the bottom like this when you do your test, you're going to be good. So now we'll kind of finish up this corner and then start working our way down the side. So I'm just going to put a clip on the vertical face here, down here. I'm going to do it down here. You will notice on the back edge we don't have an alignment aid. The reason we don't have the alignment aid is because the back side of the van isn't a straight cutaway for the opening. You can see there's this big jog in the door here, which makes doing an alignment aid nearly impossible. We tried. So your goal visually is when you stand back is just to have this as straight as possible. So because I've got this top corner kind of in now, I'm going to put the weather stripping into here, and then I'm going to step back and just look at the vertical alignment of this to make sure I'm happy with that, and then tack it all the way down. The way the sliding door works is there's this arm that goes into a track underneath here. So you probably need to open the door a little bit like this to pull the weather stripping just kind of beyond the corner, just like that. I'll push this back just to give you guys the best view. Oh, you can see this weather stripping is actually 2 pieces. See, there's a split here. So that'll actually make it easier. So I can actually just pull that out, but you know, keep this open so you guys can see. So yeah, I'm just going to tack it in a few places to get to the bottom, just so I can check the sort of vertical alignment of it. So the biggest thing is just take your time. Take your time as you work your way down. So you can see I'm starting to hover a little bit above the bottom here, so I'm probably going to want to pull a little material down. So I just kind of do that by pulling the fabric clips a little bit, bringing a little bit of material down. You can see I've made up that gap at the bottom, and then come down to the bottom. So like I said at the bottom is you want to get this weather stripping kind of out of the way as much as possible. It doesn't need to be perfectly straight. As you can see, like I'm just kind of pulling it, just sort of eyeballing it. Do I look close? Once you get the actual screen zipped in, you might need to make some further adjustments, but you'll be able to make those adjustments with the screen installed. So as you get to the jog here, it's the same kind of thing as the corners. Is you want to make sure the weather stripping, you get it kind of forced into the curve as much as possible so you don't end up with a bunch of excess. Because this weather stripping is 2 pieces, I'm just going to pull it off. Gotta close the door to give me a little bit of working room here. Okay, now that we have the perimeter installed all the way around, I'll just take off this last clip here. It's time to actually zip in the screen. So if you remember, we set this aside at the start. The one side of the screen you'll notice has the magnet tube, which is the door. That is the front side. So you're going to want to go to the bottom of that side, and that's where you're going to start zipping it in. So again, this is another part of the project that goes a little bit easier with 2 people. Zipped in. So once I got the zipper started, tease it all around. Okay, so you can see in the corner here, the zipper doesn't want to go, it's too tight. So all that means is that I need to let some of the material that I've got in the weather stripping, I need to loosen it off, which is easy to do. So I'll just pull off. So taking the fabric clip off so I can reposition it. You can see now I zipped it down, moved the fabric clip, and then just reinstalled it. So now that's looking pretty good. I'm actually really happy with that. If you look at this zipper here, it looks like it kind of bows in a little bit down here. So that means I can pull a little bit of fabric in here. But before I do that, I'm just going to test the door mechanism, see if that's working properly. So pull it open. Yeah, it's grabbing nicely. So you can see when you let it go, the top is nice and taut. There's a little piece in the top which will show you from the inside where you can actually tighten that a little bit more without having to adjust the screen. But you can see when I pull it open, everything comes together nicely. So I'm really happy with that. So when I look at this, I think I nailed it. I just got to pull that a little bit tighter at the bottom. So there's a foam tube tunnel at the very bottom with an opening at the front. So you just kind of stick that in and work it down like this, all the way down. The last thing here is to trim it. I usually recommend people to kind of leave the screen kind of like this for a couple days, just to make sure they're happy with the fit and they don't need to adjust the perimeter. Because once you do trim it, It is a little bit harder to adjust it because you have obviously less material to work with. But that being said, before your first kind of big trip, I do recommend making sure that you get the screen trimmed up. Once you have it trimmed, sometimes you can do it depending on how much excess there is. It's a good idea to close the door a few times and just make sure the weather stripping is seated. Let's see if I can. So yeah, that looks good. So yeah, you want to just shut the door a few times, make sure it's all seated properly. You'll notice on the bottom of the piece, there's these nylon webbing hooks. These nylon webbing hooks will insert some B-roll from the Sprinter van install. They're actually designed if you want to screw down the perimeter into your wood aftermarket floor. This van doesn't have a floor in it. It's just the metal floor, so I'm not going to show that here. But that's what it's for, is just to screw down. So we'll insert the clips from that and how that install actually works there. There's a few things you have to be mindful of, is making sure that you don't screw it in a way that interferes with the door closing. So we'll kind of insert a clip from another van install that has a non-factory upfitter floor in it. The other thing to note is when you are zipping the screen in and out, the zippers you're going to use are the ones that have the silicone pull tabs in them. So you zip those all the way up, like so. And the sliding door screen, it actually rolls from the inside. So you'll notice with the foam tube, it's really easy to roll it up. And then you've got our G hooks here, and you just hook it in place. So when you move into the van, you'll notice that there's a kind of 3 straps across the top. This first strap that is directly above the magnet tube is just a little bit of adjustability. If you find that your magnet isn't properly catching at the top when you open and close it, what you can do is you can just take this piece and you can pull it tighter and then just stick it. There's a piece of Velcro right here you can clip it to, and that just puts a little bit more tension right above the magnet tube and makes it so when you open and close the screen door, the magnets come together nicely and close close automatically. Is right now the entire screen is just being held up by the fabric clips and the weather stripping, which is fine. But as an added precaution is we've included these straps. And what you can do is on basically all of the vans, whether it's the Promaster, the Transit, or the Sprinter van, in this frame tubing above the door, it comes with various holes. And I find it's a good idea to either use a riv nut in one of these holes or a machine screw with a nylock nut and actually fasten these pieces kind of up in here. So whether you use an existing hole or you drill a new hole, you have to punch a hole in these straps. And that way the whole screen is actually fastened to the vehicle of the van. So you're not relying just on the weather stripping to hold it in place. If you have a trim detail here and you don't want to do that, these are just Velcroed on here and you can take these pieces off and you don't need them. But if you do have access to this, I do recommend using these straps to secure it in place. Like I said, either putting a riv nut in one of these holes and using a riv nut. If you're not familiar with how riv nuts work, you can drill a hole and just get a bolt in there. Even a self-tapping screw would be fine. Just something to fasten the weight of the material so it's hanging on these straps as opposed to only being supported by the weather stripping. It's just kind of a recommendation we have. But that's kind of all you need to know on the inside of the van. All right, and that wraps up the sliding door install on the Ram Promaster. Again, the sliding door is the much harder install of the two pieces if we're talking the sliding versus the rear door. So if you got through this one and you're now going to do the rear door, you got the hardest one out of the way. So if you do have any questions on the install or are having trouble with any areas, don't hesitate to reach out to us at support. The email is hello@thewonderful.co, and we'll be happy to answer any and all of your questions.